the scale of the problem it's ahead of us is both terrifying and it's no longer getting postponed to the future. Madam Speaker Pro Tem, this is going to be sort of a two-parter. I'm going to come back in 2 weeks and provide solutions. But right now, I need to define the problem. And as you know, right now around the Capitol Hill complex, we have dozens and dozens of brand new members and hundreds of potentially new staffers. They're all trying to find their office and, which way is up and where the bathrooms are. I mean, all the things we go through when we're brand new around here. And my fear is no one's telling these members that are new, and even talking to the members who've been here for a while, the truth. And the truth is the math, and the math always wins. And we're in real trouble. And what scares me is with some of the things going on in the economy right now, with where interest rates look like they're going, with inflation now becoming structural, it's potentially just devastating to the individuals out there and our brothers and sisters in the country, just the affordability, being able to afford a house, of food. But you got to understand what it also means to the stability of this country. So let's actually walk through, and some of this is big boy math. It's going to be complex. But there's a couple punchlines in here I want to be remembered. I'm not going to take you back to 1965, but let's do last year. This is last year's budget cycle. Understand over 71% of all of our spending is on autopilot. The fact of the matter is, this is what we call mandatory. Only 13% was defense. 16% was discretionary, what we functionally debate here, what we really fight over. But this mandatory here, you see red, your government functionally is a insurance company with an army. This is health, Medicare, Social Security, other benefits, pensions for military, for government workers, those sorts of things. This is mandatory. And it's on autopilot. I don't think there's a member here who's ever ultimately voted on this red portion. It's a formula. You turn 65, you get certain benefits. You serve in the military a certain amount of time, you get certain benefits. It's autopilot. Defense, well, that we debate, we work through, but the fact of the matter is defense sort of stays within a certain mean of the GDP. And then domestic, crazy thing, domestic actually as a percentage of GDP at the end of decade will be flat. So where's all this debt coming from? Where's all this growth coming from? And I'm going to give you an answer, and it's going to make people really unhappy. But you need to understand, when we talk about just last year's borrowing, does anyone out there understand how big it was? Okay, so we borrowed functionally $1.375 trillion. How much is that? It's $114 billion a month. It's $26 billion a week. It's $3.7 billion a day. It's $159 million an hour. It's $2.6 million a minute. But here's the one we're told when big numbers, how do you get it so it's understandable? If I came to you right now and said, how much last year did your government borrow every second? Anyone in this body able to answer that? Turns out it was $43,600 a second. We borrowed $43,600 every second last year. Does anyone see a problem? Or is it one of those things that as long as we're handing out goodies and subsidizing the folks who will vote for us or contribute to us, the world is good? So where's all this debt coming from? Brian Riddell, Manhattan Institute, basically just put out a series of slides where they take the Congressional Budget Office, the O&B office from the administration, sort of look at it and say, what's driving the debt? So right today we hold $31 trillion of total debt. That's borrowing from trust funds and everything, but that's the total debt. But from today for the next 30 years, based on a previous interest rate calculation, so we haven't even plugged in the new higher interest rates that we're borrowing money on. Anyone want to guess what the borrowing is from today to the future? How much money? We're going to borrow functionally 116, well, we're going to spend 114, we're going to borrow $114 trillion. There's a $114 trillion shortfall. Now, the interesting thing, remember on that previous slide, I was saying, okay, here's mandatory, here's discretionary. Well, it turns out the discretionary military, we calculate today to actually have about a $1.9 trillion surplus over the next 30 years. So where's $114 trillion of borrowing coming from? And this is really uncomfortable. And I will tell you, I believe the Democrats did something actually really crappy during the election. But, you know, it's a knife fight. I accept, you know, the knives come out. It's all about winning. But when you had campaigns out there, they're going to cut your Medicare. You can't even have an honest conversation here. What's going on? The shortfall in Medicare, when you add in the interest cost, is $80 trillion. The shortfall in Social Security is $35.8 trillion. The entire borrowing over the next 30 years is Social Security and Medicare. We got old. The fact of the matter is this place didn't pay any attention. There was this thing called baby boomers. And you get the clown show around here that says, well, we'll do Medicare for all. That's a financing bill. It had nothing to do with what we pay. Obamacare, that's a financing bill. It's who gets subsidized, has to pay. The Republican alternative was ultimately a financing bill. You need a revolution in what we pay, not who pays it. But that's actually more uncomfortable here than actually having a debate over raising taxes or doing entitlement reform, an actual discussion of should we legalize technology? Should we legalize the things that actually create disruptions in providing our brothers and sisters the health care that we as a society made a deal? We are going to keep our promise on Social Security and Medicare. Well, I think we are. I mean, the fact of the matter is, what is it now within a decade? Because of the new COLA increase, we just shortened the lifespan of Social Security Trust Fund by, what, almost a year? So you got about a little over a decade, and our brothers and sisters who live on Social Security are heading towards a 25% cut. What's this place going to do? Medicare is just unsustainable. The stunning amount to finance our brothers and sisters, our promise for those who turn 65 and get Medicare, to finance it basically consumes every dollar of this government. It's math. It's the reality. And how many of you during this last campaign had an honest debate, honest conversation? Anyone was even willing to talk about this? Really dangerous, because the other side will run nasty ads about you. It will scare people. Yet by not dealing with it, you are sentencing our seniors to misery, because at some point this hits the wall. So what's going on? Why am I even more dour right now than I was several months ago? It's inflation. It's the cost of everything. It's the affordability in our society. But you're crushing people, and we're going to walk through a little bit of that. But you've got to understand, and I'm sorry, I'm going to geek out on interest rates for a moment, but then I'm going to try to show what it actually means to everyone in this country. What we're doing to you, and so many of our brothers and sisters out there, you don't understand how, I'm sorry, it's a sort of high-level technical economic term, how screwed you are. So let's sort of walk through this. We were building budgets a year ago on an assumption that U.S. sovereign debt, when you did the 2-year, the 5 years, the 10 years, the 20 years, the 30 years, okay, the blended interest rate, the weighted daily average, there's all these fun calculations. Were actually really interesting stuff. We were originally about 1.78 we thought would be our mean interest rate. Then last, was this March or May? March, we recalculated because of this thing called inflation. oh, we're going to be up to 2.10. Then the reality of it is we ended up at a recalculation of, hey, the U.S. mean now is heading towards 2.85, and that's on the 10-year. We have some economists around us who are starting to say it's going higher. It's going higher. And I'm going to show you a couple things here of what happens to us as a country if the way the Federal Reserve has to stop inflation is raising interest rates, breaking the labor market, because you understand within there, even though there's this delay effect, that also means what you and I have to pay the interest back on all the borrowing. And the biggest part of the borrowing cycle has not even hit us yet, because we're just now starting to absorb and get ready for the huge spike in costs because of our demographics. Remember, baby boomers, the final tail end of the baby boomers is moving into their retirement benefits. And as they get slightly older and a little bit older, the Medicare costs start to really go up, and we haven't even hit that financing cycle. It's coming. What happens if we have to finance that at the higher interest rates? So you start looking at some of this. 3 months T-bill back in March, 0.2, and that was our Biden administration estimate for the 3-year. The actual 3-year right now, 1.75. Let's see, what's the difference between a 0.20 and a 1.75? Can anyone say a whole lot? This may not mean much to you, but this is money your taxes are going to be paying back. So here's the punchline. I'm going to make it really simple. What if this inflationary cycle stuck with us? What if instead of that, what was it, 1.78 or even the 2.3% interest rate on U.S. sovereign debt, what if it were 2 points higher? Just 2% higher, which functionally 15 years ago, that's where we were at. Remember, we actually had a reprieve, completely fake economic reprieve for a decade with artificially low interest rates. So we were borrowing, and the Federal Reserve kept interest rates lower, particularly since 2008. And now we're about to pay the cost of it. So what would happen if we paid that 2% higher? Functionally at the end, and my math is a little bit less, the end of 30 years, 100% of all tax receipts, of all taxes, all tariffs, everything that comes into the government, 100% goes just to pay interest. You got to understand how sensitive we are as a government, as a society, as a country now, how fragile we've made ourselves, because we're going to borrow another 1 to 1.3, there's one estimate, $1.4 trillion this year. We're never paying anything off. We're borrowing, and it gets worse and worse because our demographics as we get older, unless we crash the price of healthcare. So that's going to be 2 weeks from now. We're going to talk about things we could do to accomplish that. But are you prepared to live in a country that if our mean interest rate goes up 2%, stays there? All tax receipts go just to cover our interest. There's no more government, there's no more military, there's no more benefits, there's no more Social Security, there's no more Medicare. This is why it's so crucial around here to have an honest conversation where people put batteries in their calculator. Instead, this place is living on theater. Oh, modern monetary policy. We can spend all the money we want. Look, nothing happened. Oh, got it. Didn't work. And in many ways, I can show you right now, the largest tax increase in modern history has happened in the last year. If the fact of the matter, you live in my Phoenix, Scottsdale area, and you are a working person, you are a hard-working taxpayer, and you have not had a pay hike, do you realize you've lost 6 weeks, maybe more, of your labor? We're still at 12.1% inflation in my community. You've lost 6 weeks of your labor. If I'd walked in and said, hey, I'm going to take a month and a half of your salary and that's going to be my new tax hike, you would have lost your mind. But if we do it through this thing called inflation, where we strip the affordability of your groceries and your gasoline and everything else in your life. Did you notice it? Well, you knew there's a problem. You know life has got much harder. You know sometimes you get to the checkout stand and you're taking things back because the price just doesn't work on your budget. And the perverse thing, you're going to see a chart here, my next one, where actually there's going to be this little drop in sort of the debt to GDP and those things. And that's because that inflation actually has been a tax. We lowered the value of your income. We lowered the value of your savings. By the same time, we lowered the value of all this debt because we're going to pay it back with what we call inflated dollars, which is wonderful up until the next year or two when we have to refinance that debt and refinance the debt and refinance the new spending at the higher interest rates. And then that little benefit of taxing you through inflation goes away and we're off to the races and it becomes hell. And remember, this has brought down other countries for hundreds of years. And it's right in front of us. And no one seems to come behind these microphones and talk about it, educate about it. And for the last couple of years, I've come here behind these microphones and tried to show solutions and then drives the lobbyists out of their minds. So let's take a look at this. And let's see if I can make this work. This is deficits during the Biden administration, fiscal year 23, budget baseline versus a 1% rise in interest. Okay, do we all agree that we've had at least a 1% rise in interest rates? Yes. So do you see this one little bit of a fall right there? So this orange is what happens when you tack on the additional interest. That little fall is functionally the fact we devalued your dollar. That's our little benefit from taxing you with a way you didn't know. But then, boom. And functionally, the budget cycle we're about to work on is the 24 budget cycle. You're basically going to have a deficit of 1.4 trillion. And then, boom, it's 1.5 trillion. You get out a couple more years, you're heading towards 1.75 trillion. In less than a decade, you're well over $2 trillion a year in just borrowing. And this chart explodes if we go beyond that 1% rise in interest rates. Structurally, even if I remove saying, hey, we're going to go back to living in that world of that fantasy artificially low interest rate, we're still heading towards $2 trillion a year borrowing. It just takes 10 years. This is insane. Functionally, right in here, interest will be just the basic borrowing. You know, all of defense, a whole bunch of discretionary and other things will be all live on borrowed money. And here, and look, most people have no idea what the concept of debt to GDP. It's the concept of, here's the size of my economy. And yes, we're borrowing all this money, but look how big my economy is. And that economy's ability to finance, just like your income finances your credit cards. And as long as your income keeps going up faster than the debt on your credit cards, you know, you can live. You're going to be okay. What happens when your economy isn't growing, your income isn't growing as fast as you're borrowing on those credit cards? At a certain point, it comes to an end. We're heading towards a time where if we add, this is our baseline. If we start adding a little bit of higher interest rates because of we have to finance the debt, we got to sell our bonds, the bond markets are expecting higher interest rates because of inflation. You start seeing the chart where you're hitting a world where at the end of, now I know this is 30-year projections, but remember we're selling 30-year bonds. Baseline, the baseline number is 185% of debt to GDP. That means the debt will be 100 or 85% bigger than the entire economy. If we had 3% higher interest rates, the debt is functionally 245% bigger than the entire economy. Do you think we ever get anywhere? Because this is what we're doing to ourselves. This is already baked in the cake if these interest rates go up. But this down here, the base CBO assumption, remember, we're already over 100%. So right now, our borrowing is already substantially bigger than the entire size of our economy. It's why growth is moral, but it's also necessary. Because if we don't start growing this economy and we're continuing just the borrowing, because remember, what was the primary driver of our borrowing? Medicare and Social Security. We got old. It's demographics, and getting old is that Republican or Democrat. It's just who we are. That's driving most of our borrowing, and we're not adopting policies that just maximize growth at every opportunity. We're destroying the future. And I need my brothers and sisters on the left to at least embrace some basic truths. 2007, very end of 2017, we did tax reform. Some people go, oh, it was tax cuts, except for the rich actually pay a higher percentage of federal income taxes today than they did under the old tax system. But tax receipts, 2022, tax receipts, the highest in U.S. history by far. And this is under the new tax system. If you're going to demagogue us for doing tax reform, trying to bring back businesses back to the United States and get them to domicile and manufacture and do things here in the country, you could at least pull out a chart and show me where the revenues disappeared, because they didn't. They're right here. We brought in $4.8 trillion in tax receipts last year, and we're still borrowing $1.3 trillion. The spending has just exploded around here, and now we hit our structural deficits because of our demographics. It gets uglier and uglier and uglier, and we've made ourselves incredibly fragile. God forbid we ever have a failed bond auction or an undersubscribed one, and interest rates start to spike. Do you understand what happens to the entire world, let alone your savings? We don't need to do this to ourselves. There are solutions, but this body is incapable of having that debate. And dear God, please, with a Republican majority, no matter how thin it is, maybe we'll actually try doing something honest and adult with the calculators. And you keep looking at the charts, and there's charts out there. It's not revenues. Revenues, there's this whole line of thought out there that's been worked on by the left and the right, that we raise taxes, somehow we stay within a certain mean of the size of the economy. When we've lowered taxes, somehow the revenues come back up to taxes always seem to come in just right about here. So if this is 20% of GDP, you raise the taxes, the economy seems to shrink, the growth shrinks, we fall back to the mean. You lower taxes, the economy grows, the revenues come back. It's just, you have decades and decades and decades of data. And you look at the charts, and it's pretty darn clear. We're going to take in 19.1 to 20%. Sometimes we fall down to 18% of the economy in revenues, in receipts, in taxes. So the art here is design a tax code, design a regulatory code, adopt embracing of technology and other things that maximize growth. So the ultimate solution is grow, 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 and then adopt disruptive technologies that lower prices, so affordability. Imagine if you had a society, once again, that was growing. Your wages were going up, but inflation wasn't. Where your healthcare costs were actually going down. Where your savings, your investments, your planning for retirement, your ability to help your kids go to college got better. We can do that. We did that in 17, 18, 19, even the first quarter of 20 before the pandemic. There's a model to do it. And all that progress, all that's closing income inequality, making the poor less poor, the hardworking, tax-paying middle class, making them more prosperous. It's all gone. the Democrats succeeded in 18 months of crushing the people of this country by really crappy policy. Great virtue signaling, just incredibly good virtue signaling. Really crappy policy. And once again, I need my brothers and sisters on the left to buy a calculator and understand. If you came in and said, I'm going to take every dime, you make small businesses, rich people, high-income earners, if I take every dime, you make $500,000 to the next dollar, we just take everything. And you've heard this, oh, rich people aren't paying enough. Take every dime, you functionally don't get anywhere. So you would get maybe, and this is assuming that they stop, work, they continue to work as hard, they make the same amount of money, so they don't change their behavior at all. So it's a math experiment. You get about 5.1% of GDP in taxes. Problem is, our borrowing is already about to hit 6%, and in a couple more decades, we're over 12%. It's a fantasy. And look, the Republicans have their sin too. We will often say, well, waste and fraud, foreign aid, that's just almost a rounding error. Remember a little while ago, $40,000+ a second in borrowing? The scale of the problem it's ahead of us is both terrifying and it's no longer getting postponed to the future. I've gotten in front of audiences and A, they'll boo when you try to explain them the truth of the math. But B, well, I was told this 10 years ago. Yeah, we had 10 years of artificially low interest rates that allowed Congress to engage in really crappy policy. What is that saying? Chickens coming home to roost. I'm not particularly good at colloquialisms, but it's time. It's here. Will this new Congress, with a divided government, step up, tell the public the truth, tell our new freshman class the truth, and actually take on a really tough decision? Do you want a society, do you want a country that's prosperous and innovative and disruptive, but we're growing so fast, so healthy, that you can imagine a world where healthcare prices aren't going up twice as fast as inflation, where your wages go up faster than inflation, where affordability, you go to the grocery or gasoline, it doesn't take your breath away. We can do that. At least I think we can do it. I just want to know, are we going to have partners on the other side to do what's honorable? Because growth is moral. Are we going to do the right thing for our society, for our brothers and sisters out there? Are we going to continue with the virtue signaling? Because virtue signaling may be brilliant politics. It's really crappy economics. And with that, Madam Speaker Pro Tem, I yield back.